Welcome, everybody, to the second episode of Fantasy Book Critics video podcast focusing on authors and their favorite books. My name is Mihir Wanchoo, and today joining me is one of my dearly beloved friends and favorite authors, Dyrk Ashton. Today, he has nominated the book called Creatures of Light and Darkness by Roger Zelazny, and we are going to be focusing on that. This book was published first in 1969. It has since then, gone off, readers' radars, but since the early 2000s has faced kind of a renaissance and has been republished since then as well. It has some pretty strange stuff, but I'm going to let Dyrk talk about that. And so, Dyrk, would you like to introduce ourselves to the listeners and viewers of this video?
My name is Dyrk Ashton. I am author of the Paternus trilogy, epic urban fantasy, mythology-based trilogy. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And for those who don't know, the first book, Paternus, also came in third into the 2016 edition of the SPFPO. It was also my highest rated book in that series, and it is one of my favorite Finnish series of all time because it focuses on the mythology of the entire world. It has a whole bunch of stuff, and if you haven't checked it out, please do so. We'll be including the links and everything down below, so you can check it out.
Oh, cool.
So, Dyrk, I kind of have an idea of why you decided to choose this one because it focuses on mythology.
Because it's crazy.
It is crazy. I don't want the second part. But I do want to ask you, why did you select this? Because Roger Zelazny is very well known for his Chronicles of Amber. There's also The Lord of Light, and a lot of other books. But I wanted to clarify why you chose this title.
I stumbled across Road Marks, one of his books, as a teenager in a tiny little bookstore, while along this stretch of highway that's by the Toledo airport, because my dad's flight had been delayed. I was like 16. Went to pick him up and went in and found that book and was just like blown away by how insane it was. And some of his books are a little crazier than others, but I became a fan immediately, and I just started devouring anything Zelazny I could get my hands on. Now, at that time, there was no Amazon or anything like that, so I had to find them in libraries and used bookstores and things like that. And a lot of the books had been kind of out of print or were hard to find at that time. So it was decades before I really got to read through a lot of them, and oddly enough, Chronicles of Amber was one of the very last things that I read of his. So my early impressions of his work were just, and I had been a huge myth freak, and he uses mythology in almost all of his books. I mean, he's got books based on Navajo folklore and legend, on Norse, Hindu, with Lord of Light. And Creatures of Light and Darkness is mostly based in Egyptian, though there's some Greek thrown in and other kinds of things too. So as I developed writing, working on screenplays, my tastes in reading and writing styles, he's been a huge influence on me. Over the years, and a lot of people haven't heard of him, or if they have, it's Chronicles of Amber, and some people have read that, or Lord of Light, but most of his other work, a lot of people just haven't read. So I wanted to kind of highlight his stuff for folks, because it's he was writing back in the 60s, before the real big names emerged in the 80s, or even 70s and 80s, that a lot of people know today. So he had a heavy influence on them, regardless of what they might say, though his stuff is much more bizarre than even Chronicles of Amber, which is his most kind of straightforward fantasy. Very much uses a lot from like Arthurian legend in there, though he certainly makes it his own. And I didn't even know until much later that he I've got to even look at these numbers because they're amazing. He he won 3 Nebula Awards out of 14 nominations, and 6 Hugo Awards also out of 14 nominations. So he's just, he was like the bright shining star of the time. And I also found out that he's from Ohio. He's from Euclid. He's an Ohio boy like me. He's eastern part of the state. I'm northeastern. I'm northwestern part of the state. But I had no idea that he was from Ohio until actually a couple of days ago. So yeah, I'm even more glad that I picked him. And his styles, he takes these enormous risks with his writing style. He was also a very well-known poet. Creatures of Light and Darkness is written in present tense, and I had completely forgotten that, because the last time I read it was before I wrote Paternus a couple of years before, and I did a reread just last week and was like, oh wow, that's present tense, and I wrote Paternus in present tense. So, which I got a lot of grief for, but from some people, but it's all worked out okay. There are a lot of people that like that book, and that's all I can hope for. So and he loves, and I've been a huge mythology myth forever, so of course, his works like really appealed to me. And his imagination is just crazy. I mean, his books, especially like Creatures of Light and Darkness, and my other favorite of his, A Night in the Lonesome October, are really, I mean, they're kind of zany, though I don't believe he walks that line for me like nobody else can, between just zany goofiness for the fun of it, and yet it can still have these passages that come in that have this incredible emotional gravitas to them, for me, and even, and all of his books are really short. So the amount of story that he packs in one book is just amazing. And I'll go ahead, of all the quotes that we read that for writing from authors, his is my favorite, and this will give you a little bit of an idea. And I actually have this up on my website under About the Author. And this is my very favorite quote about writing from one of my very favorite authors. He wrote, "Occasionally, there arises a writing situation where you see an alternative to what you are doing, a mad, wild gamble of a way for handling something, which may leave you looking stupid, ridiculous, or brilliant. You just don't know which. You can play it safe there too and proceed along the route you've mapped out for yourself, or you can trust your personal demon who delivered that crazy idea in the first place. Trust your demon." Roger Zelazny. And you can tell from his writing that, yeah, that's what he did. So, yeah, I love that quote. I love that.
He went along with his demon for almost all of his books. Like you mentioned, he has various influences. He also bodied a lot of mythology from the world for different books. And I know you kind of have mentioned like Navajo, Arthurian, Hindu, some Lord of Light. This one was Egyptian, and then I think you also mentioned before like some Greek mythology as well. So yeah, he definitely did that. But just following up on that, going on to the mad and zany ride, you do some of the same things with Paternus, and that's why it's such a brilliant trilogy. Like, I know some people don't like it, but yeah, the greatest book in the world will still have 1 star and 2 stars, no matter where you go on Goodreads.
Yeah.
It was just
oh, yeah.
But
yeah.
What you have done with Paternus is probably as unique. And I don't know if it's something in the waters of Ohio that, has to people who love mythology so much.
Lots of lead.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but there's 2 of 2. That's pretty unique. 2 of 2 from this one corner of the world, and northeast and northwest parts. But still, Ohio is not that big, to have 2 of these people who are still writing, this weird but intellectually curious stuff.
Yeah, I honestly only really realized how much of an influence he had been on some of the things I did in Paternus as an afterthought. I never consciously was thinking I want to make this Zelazny-esque. I never thought that, which I find really is interesting. I'm working on a short story for the next Unbound edition for Grim Oak, of short stories for Grim Oak Press. And I am going to now consciously make that Zelazny-esque.
That would be awesome.
I will fail completely because I am nowhere near a Roger Zelazny, but I'm gonna try, and I'm gonna have a lot of fun with it.
Well, you will be standing on the shoulders of a giant, so you can only come from over there. And for those who do not know, the Grim Oak Press that Dyrk is referring to is by Sean Speakman. He is a good friend of Terry Brooks, and he's also a writer, an acclaimed writer in himself. This will be something which we'll try to find out more information a little bit later from you, Dyrk, about this one.
Okay.
I'm excited about your short stories. Okay.
Okay.
Talking about creatures of light and darkness, I have one simple question, because after I read the book, I was like confused myself as well. Do you think, is it epic fantasy, or is it epic science fiction, or for a third option, it's just Zelazny being Zelazny?
That's a really good question. It's sci fantasy, I think, because it does have stuff that's just obviously magic. It's just not, and they even call it that. But they have these insane pieces of technology, right? They have AIs, they have machines that can turn people into androids and then back to human. They can graft skin, they can just do all these kinds of things. And yet then they can also just go like this and open portals and step into another dimension, and fight with basically magic, and just they can contemplate, right? The Steel General, and in particular the Steel General and Joaquin can through, I mean, literally hundreds of years, these beings are old, of meditation and study and practice, can do what's called the fugue state, which means they can travel in time. And there is one battle in this book between Joaquin and the who turns out to not be Joaquin, and I'm not going to worry about spoilers for this, because he turns out to be Set, who's the destroyer, one of the most powerful of all gods. And he doesn't even find that out, but he can do all these great things. And then we find out that he is Set. And they have this fugue battle. And the way that Zelazny describes it, it goes on too long. I want to read some of my favorite passages, and that's definitely one of them. But the way he describes how they leap back in time, trying to get advantage, but they're also doubling themselves in at the same time. So they're positioning themselves behind and in front and to the side of others until they feel either they get tired of doing this, and there are hundreds of them out there, or one of them feels they have the advantage and they attack. And then it just gets insane. It's just, but the way that he writes it and the way he describes it, I lied. There was during War of Gods, there's a battle where Peter and Kagan are slipping around between worlds, dimensions, basically. They're not traveling in time, though. And I did invoke that. I did think about this battle when I did that. I don't have it. Mine's not nearly as well written, and it doesn't go on as long. But that was a purposefully Zelazny moment.
I do remember that, and I know which one you're referring to. And of course, this book has been out for more than 50 years. People who are mad about spoilers, really, a 50-year-old book, I think stacks any.
It's hard to talk, and particularly for a series like this, it's really hard to talk about your favorite books without spoilers, right? You just almost you can't.
No, you can't. And I'll try to add another warning in the content description, but it should be fine.
Sure.
50-year-old book, not a problem. But I do.
I won't give out the ending or anything, but I'm not gonna not tell some things.
No, it's absolutely fine. I do want to talk about the battle because I know how it starts. Like they're both Wakim and the Steel General, who's a cool character himself. They're first standing mutely, and there's two other observers who are noticing them, and they're just like quiet, and then literally it ends with them suddenly making a move, and then it goes back minutes, and then the people, they start multiplying because they're making copies of, well, not making copies themselves, but they're going back in time, as you mentioned, in the fugue state. And this fugue state is something that they focus upon a lot throughout this tiny book, so as to speak. Do you think he was inspired by, I don't know, something in mythology because of this, or do you think it just came up on his own?
There is some stuff like this in like the Mahabharata, isn't there? I mean,
it kind of is, yes.
Yeah, kind of, but there are battles that are kind of like that, almost like my slipping battle is kind of like that. And I would not be surprised if he was inspired and then took it,
to another level,
to where he did, by Hindu mythology, because I can't think of anything else that I've read that had that kind of time traveling battle sort of things where you're using it as a strategy to fight.
That was a unique feature of this book. All right, so you're gonna go with the epic science fiction answer. Perfectly fine.
Yeah, that sci-fantasy, I would say some of probably the very first.
That's true. And I mean, after that, the only other thing I can think of is science fantasy. The next kind of major big science fantasy is the Coldfire trilogy. I think of, like, by C.S. Friedman.
I haven't read it, so I can't.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to trust you on that one.
It's set on a different world, like thousands of light years apart from Earth. But the literally premise is that people from Earth travel to that planet and they start to colonize the planet, but they figure out that there's something called the wild fae on the planet, which starts attacking people in their dreams, and that's kind of how it begins. So it's almost like a fantasy, but it's set on a different world, and you have, like, space travel in the history of the world. That's how they write over there. So it's kind of like that. There has been an advent of science fantasy nowadays, again in the indie world as well.
I think there are a lot of indie people are doing it on purpose.
Which is cool, right? Which is so cool that, because previously it's like there's a hard line between science fiction and fantasy. Of course, the lines are blurring even more. One of my favorites from last year was Shadows of the Dust by Alec Hudson.
I was going to bring up Alec. That's what he was doing with that. I remember talking to him while he was coming up with the idea and working on that. And I haven't read it. I am ashamed to say I am so slow, and my TBR is like the mountain is toppling. But I have read more books to this point this year than I have in many years past. So that's a good thing. But I hear great things about that book. I'm glad to hear you liked it. Yeah.
It is fun. It's like it's kind of space travel set up on gigantic beasts, but it's also a Western, because once they arrive on a certain planet, it's kind of set up like a Western. It's a lot of fun and it's unique.
Sounds fantastic.
Are there any other science fantasy books that you'd like to give a shout out to, which you think are really cool?
Boy, a lot of them are so close that I really love, but they would have to be, I mean, they're more science fiction. I mean, I'm talking about like the really old stuff, like Jules Verne kinds of things. Though they take you to some damn fantastical worlds, right?
They do. Yep.
Or John Carter on Mars,
Yes.
Once you get there, it's like swords and all kinds of fun, great fantasy style stuff, but it is science fiction, basically. Though you don't know how that portal works that jumped him there. I mean, that could have been magic, right?
Yeah.
So it's real hard to tell. So those are the only ones that are really coming into mind that I think a lot of them really did toe that line. And even something like Conan the Barbarian, there were some bizarre machines that that some of the evil sorcerers would build, right? And they might be powered by a kernel of what they called magic, but a lot of it felt to me like a lot of it feels to me like it could have been that they just called it that because but there is, I think, a little science fiction kind of slide into that, and of course I think even some of Lovecraft's work, I would say slides also into science fiction from just fantasy.
That's a fascinating point to bring up, because all the authors and all the books that you mentioned, they're pre-circa 1960s or even 50s, they're from the olden age, so as to speak, where there's no genre guidelines of it has to be clear cut. It was all mixed. Even the Conan the Barbarian series, if I'm not wrong, I think it's set on a post-apocalyptic Earth, maybe even. It's not clarified. John Carter of Mars is so much fun. It is literally one of the best series out there. So much fun. Pulpy. I just wish the Disney movie had made a lot of profit, because I loved it. I loved watching the entire movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I just don't know why. I mean, there's reasons why it didn't work, but that was a movie. I wish they could have made this trilogy as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, getting back to the topic at hand. Sorry.
That's okay, because this is what we're here to talk about. Stuff we love, right?
Yes, absolutely. But focusing on the book you love, I wanted to ask you about Egyptian mythology, because like you mentioned, this book specifically focuses on a lot of Egyptian gods. Anubis is mentioned, Horus is mentioned, Set, as you said,
Set, Osiris,
and I think
Isis, Thoth.
All of them are mentioned, and we are not really we are given clues as to maybe are they truly the gods, or are they just people who have ascended the position of the gods. For you, knowing how much of a geek you are, how much do you enjoy this?
How much do I enjoy that?
Yep.
Oh my God, that's a huge reason that I love Zelazny's work, and particularly this one, right? And somehow in just very short amount of time, somehow Zelazny is able to imbue a location and a character with this incredible depth. And he doesn't do long descriptions, and they're often quite stage direction type, right? Which is kind of fun. And but the mythology stuff, of course, I mean, as soon as I saw, would see as a kid or a young man see a mention of that it's got Anubis in it, I'd be like, okay, and I would read it. And a lot of them, just didn't stick with me. I'm sure I've forgotten as many as I or more than I remember, but I could never forget Zelazny's work. And it's so bizarre though that upon rereads, I'm like, oh, that's how that happened, or I had totally forgotten that this is why that was like that. And then he throws in these weird, it's got all this Egyptian kind of stuff, but of course he's throwing in all these other multiple worlds and the house of life and the house of death and the waves that go between and the multiple world stuff, which isn't a large part of Egyptian myth. That's more Hindu, more Norse, even Mesoamerican and South American mythologies talk about those sorts of things. Zoroastrian, of course, which is where a lot of it comes from. But and then he throws in these weird little sentences of what these other characters are doing, and you don't know what's going on. These tiny little paragraphs, one of the first ones is the dog flips the dog worries the glove, and that's it. And then it's the dog flips the glove and pounces. So you're thinking there's a dog playing with a glove. Now it turns out that it's the Cerberus guarding the gates of hell on a pile of bones and treasure or something like that, bones, playing with Set's gauntlet of armor, gauntlet of power and armor. So, and of course, some of the characters have to go and try to get that back for Set. So I mean, it's just got these weird, like he really likes to do these kinds of placing. There's a name for these things. Mihir, help me. These things that say it's going to happen later. I'm completely.
Oracle.
Yeah, or or just just placing these things in that later you go,
yeah. Chekhov's gun. I believe
that's one of them. Absolutely. So it's just, he's so good at that, and it's so bizarre because you're reading along and this stuff is like so out of place you almost forget it was even there, but it's still in the back of your head, and I'll always bring it up at least one more time before, sometimes twice more before it's revealed. So he's just really good at that. I think the real word is pre-something, but I'm having a brain fade.
Prescient, maybe.
Yeah, right, something
maybe,
like that.
Maybe someone will leave a comment. It's like, it's this.
Oh, I'm sure they're going. I'm sure they're rolling their eyes and typing it in. They will.
Hopefully, someone will tell us in the comments. That'll be fun.
So yeah, the myth played his use of mythology played a huge part for me. This might be a good place for me to read. Just this opening. I told Mihir I have to read some of my favorite passages. So I've highlighted some in my Kindle version of it because it's a lot easier than with the book. And also my book is books are all packed away in a container, buried, waiting for my the basement office and library to be done. So I couldn't get to it. But okay, this is actually from the beginning of the book. This is the very beginning. It's called Prelude in the House of the Dead. The man walks through his 1,000-year eve in the house of the dead. If you could look about the enormous room through which he walks, you couldn't see a thing. It is far too dark for eyes to be of value. For this dark time, we'll simply refer to him as the man. There are two reasons for doing so. First, he fits the general and generally accepted description of an unmodified male human model being, walking upright, having opposable thumbs, and possessing the other typical characteristics of the profession. And second, because his name has been taken from him. There is no reason to be more specific at this point. In his right hand, the man bears the staff of his master, and it guides him through the dark. It tugs him this way, that way. It burns his hand, his fingers, his opposing thumb, if his foot strays a step from its ordained path. When the man reaches a certain place within the darkness, he mounts 7 steps to a stone dais and raps 3 times upon it with the staff. Then there is light, dim and orange and crowded into corners. It shows the edges of the enormous unfilled room. He reverses the staff and screws it into a socket in the stone. Had you ears in that room, you would hear a sound as of winged insects circling you, withdrawing, returning. Only the man hears it, though. There are over 2,000 other people present, but they are all of them dead. So that's kind of that's an opening, right?
Yep, that's definitely so. And for those who do not know, this is the opening where the as of yet unnamed main protagonist, so as to speak, is being introduced. And this is the House of Death. Why is it called the House of Death? Well, you'll find out as soon as you read the book. Yeah. And what is the unnamed protagonist going to be? Well, you'll find out as immediately after. But thank you for reading that, Dyrk, because it kind of gives a precise example of how he uses prose in a little bit of a not weird, but I would say in a different fashion. It's not straightforward. Like, he's describing things which don't make any sense. And literally, this is the first few lines of the story. Like, he's literally immersing you in this world, which is alien as alien can be. But at the same time, it bears facets of things which which kind of make sense to us from a human perspective. And then it just keeps on getting weirder and weirder.
And he throws in that kind of bizarre humor that he's going to be doing more and more with later.
I have to read out one particular line for you later, and I'll do that later when we talk about humor, because there's a weird scenario of like torture, but not exactly torture as well. So
yeah, only Zelazny can make torture funny.
Yes, in a very weird way. And for those who are thinking that we're making light of torture, we're not making light of torture. Believe me, that paragraph, as I'll try to read it out so it'll make sense to you all as well as to why it was funny and why technically while it seemingly looks like torture, it wasn't torture as conveyed with the book. All right, so Dyrk, another question for you with regards to the book. There was an element of eldritch horror to it. That sleeps, it's technically referred to as like this darkness, and people are referring to it like that they should, it needs to be destroyed, but they don't know how. It kind of gives a sense of like Lovecraftian horror, but there's no element of that. But there is that it's a hint being given, and he leaves it at that. What did you make of that, or what were your thoughts about that when you read it?
Well, he did, and I can't remember the name of the other story. There was something else that he wrote that drew upon actually some Cthulhu. In Chronicles of Amber, he actually involves the Cthulhu mythos on kind of an odd side thing. So he is interested in that kind of stuff. That eldritch power that cannot be killed even by the most powerful of gods, right? And it's really kind of terrifying and yet pitiful at the same time. And then of course there ends up being a big battle with it, and everything gets thrown at it. It destroys a world, and it still isn't dead, right?
Yep.
They can still hear it whimpering in the darkness. And it ends up one of the characters having to basically sacrifice itself. Typhon. Typhon is a character, another thing out of Greek, and of course it's a description of Typhon that I have never heard. Totally. And it also it is also kind of an eldritch horror, or contains a really horrifying eldritch power. It essentially contains this black hole, an emptiness, an abyss within it, right? And it's basically described as a giant, or any size it wants to be, including really big, shadow of a horse.
But without the horse being present.
It's just a shadow of a horse, and it's Typhon, and of course Zelazny, being Zelazny, says it's actually Set's brother and Thoth's son brother kind of thing. It's Set's son, but in this typical mythological thing, it's a son, but also a father, but also
it's a chicken and egg thing. Which came first? You never know.
Right. The eldritch horror, there's definitely an eldritch horror kind of element to it.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Also,
and it's depth and it's deep, because you go, I mean, I cringe and I feel that thing that I would feel when I was younger and reading Lovecraft, right? That kind of true horror.
Which is unfathomable by our human minds, but at the same time, it evokes a certain visceral fear which you just cannot ignore. And fiction will basically unhinge our minds. That's the key. To see it truly for what it is, or in multiple dimensions, is basically we are the way we are because that protects us from truly understanding how insignificant we are. And I think was it Lovecraft who wrote Under the Mountains of Madness, where it's like literally the last scene is something like this, like the main character sees this celestial horror or subterranean horror, I'm forgetting it was, and then they lose their mind, and that's what we just are left with.
And it's like, if these characters weren't gods, you would lose your mind, being faced with these things, but they're like because they've kind of seen almost everything. It's really funny, and Zelazny doesn't just make crazy choices in his in his plotting, right? Or in what he writes about. But he makes amazing choice. He's one of those people that you might read some of his prose and go, this is crap. But he's one of those people who is so freaking good, and it's been proven by all of his awards and his poetry and all that stuff, that he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's choosing to do it exactly this way for an effect. So his prose just blows me away. We talked about the Steel General is another one of these just like incredibly bizarre characters who really just kind of is kind of this weird side character. And I can't for the life of me figure out, he rides this dragon, kind of a metallic dragon machine across the stars, literally. And I can't quite figure out who he's really based on, other than basically he's a rebel and always has been. And people have destroyed him, but because he has the rebellious spirit, he cannot be killed. So he lives, he gets gathered back together and lives forever. But I want to read the introduction of the Steel General. They've talked about him a little bit, but here is him coming to battle with Joachim, because he's been called by one of these other wizards. He is coming, riding down the sky on the back of a great beast of burnished metal. It has 8 legs, and its hooves are diamonds. Its body is as long as 2 horses. Its neck is as long as its body, and its head is that of a Chinese demon dog out of gold. Beams of blue light come forth from its nostrils, and its tail is 3 antennae. It moves across the blackness that lies between the stars, and its mechanical legs move slowly. Each step it takes, however, crossing from nothing to nothing, carries it twice the distance of the previous step. Each stride also takes the same amount of time as the prior one. Suns flash by, fall behind, wink out. It runs through solid matter, passes through infernos, pierces nebulae, faster and faster, moving through the starfall blizzard in the forest of the night. Given a sufficient warm-up run, it is said that it could circumnavigate the universe in a single stride. What would happen if it kept running after that? No one knows. Its rider was once a man. He is the one who is called the Steel General. That is not a suit of armor that he is wearing. It is his body. He has turned off most of his humanity for the duration of the trip, and he stares now straight ahead past the scales, like bronze oak leaves on the side of his mount's neck. He holds 4 reins, each as thick as a strand of silk, on the fingertips of his left hand. He wears a ring of tanned human flesh on his little finger, because it would be senseless and noisy for him to wear metal jewelry. The flesh was once his, at least. It helped to surround him at one time long ago. Wherever he goes, he carries a collapsing 5-string banjo with him in a compartment near to where his heart used to be. When he plays it, he becomes a kind of negative Orpheus, and men follow him to hell. He is also one of the very few masters of temporal fugue in the entire universe. It is said that no man can lay hands upon him unless he permits it. His mouth was once a horse. And then it switches to another point of view. It's just insane.
It is insane, right?
It's insane, and it's just so fucking good. I don't do it justice with my reading, but that's the kind of stuff that's in his books. And it's just like, and even it still has that goofy little humor thrown in there. And just the way he decides to frame it and say it is just, you just don't see that anymore, because most people would say that it's just, not professional. But he knew exactly what he was doing. And I personally, I love it.
No, and there's a epic mythological feel to it. The way you're describing, the way he's like, he's arriving on a dragon, 8 legs, and there's particular descriptions, and also like the fact that nobody knows, he can cover the entire space-time continuum in one leap, but nobody knows what will happen afterwards. There's like, this is the kind of description which I had found in all of those, old Hindu mythological tales, which my grandmom used to tell me. Like, like Shiva had this incredible eye, third eye. If you would open, the entire universe would get destroyed, but it never opens.
Yeah.
Or like Vishnu is sitting on this giant, or like from his navel comes out a lotus from which Brahma appears, or like he's this. If he takes 3 steps, the entire universe will be covered. So that's why he only has 2 feet. And there's all these weird.
Yeah, and they never, and it's like, and I think he gets some of this from that, because a lot of what he does is never explained. He never explains. He just says it was once a horse. He never explains how it became what it is. This
Yes.
mount, this beast. And he does that in a lot of his books. Creatures of Light, or A Night in the Lonesome October has one space where there's just this amazing scene. It's told from the point of view of this guy's dog, and he has, the dog is actually in big trouble and is about to get killed, strapped down to a table, and then he senses the master's presence, and then a zip, and then it cuts, and it never explains why this whole character that we've known this whole book can do this, or what he did, because afterwards all it is the dog is free and there are body parts everywhere. Yep. And it's never explained.
And if I'm not wrong, that's Jack the Ripper was involved somehow in this.
Yeah, though he never says that it's Jack the Ripper. Never in the book is it said that this is Jack the Ripper, who in this case is actually doing horrible things that he has to do to keep from the gates of hell from being opened.
Yep, it's the setting in Whitechapel, and like so it's heavily implied that it might be.
Oh, you read it also?
I haven't read it. I haven't completed it. I started it. I've read
okay, so yeah.
Know about it, but because
it's like a much smaller story, because it takes place in kind of one small place than any of this other giant, ultra epic, multi-universal stuff. But just as insane and fun, and shorter even than this, I believe.
Yes. That one, I believe Lucas has reviewed it on the blog, The Night of Lonesome October, because I know he had mentioned it. And after you mentioned it, I was like, okay, I need to read this as well. So I am going to finish it, and maybe we'll have one to chat about that one as well. Because that one's,
I'd love to.
Zany, that one is a whole other level with a homicidal attack.
Super zany, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you another question, because it's focusing more on Zelazny's writing style, because as you mentioned, you kind of read out a couple of passages. They're both equally different. There's also, there's the thing about the humor as well. There's a humorous passage, and I'll read it out just a bit. But what I wanted to ask you was that his writing style is not for everyone. That is for sure. Like, even though he has 6 Hugos, 3 Nebulas, his writing style is not for everyone. And I don't know if whether it would be celebrated now in this day and age, or whether it was more celebrated in his day. But I still want to hear your thoughts as a writer, because you're a writer yourself. You're writing a new series. You obviously spend a lot of time along other cool writers. But knowing what you do, you have a PhD. You teach literature as well.
I teach film, but
you teach film. Sorry,
film analysis and film theory, though, so it's very similar.
It is similar, and of course, given your extensive knowledge of mythology and literature, what do you think is his writing? What about his writing style makes him so unique?
His style, I mean, it's funny. It's like there are some styles that I will read today that I'm like, I still love and think is beautiful, and I still let it influence me to a certain extent, like Tolkien's, right? And yet I don't believe that style would fly well today. Zelazny, on the other hand, or like William Gibson, right? It's just such an insane style. And he won a Nebula with his first book. And it's like, okay, if those guys appeared, Zelazny or Gibson appeared out of nowhere today and put a book out, would they be like groundbreaking geniuses, or would they be like, that shit's just too weird, you know? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, which is one reason I really wanted to talk about his work and stuff like this, because I would love to get more people reading this stuff. And you can read this stuff. A fast reader could read this book in a night.
Oh, yeah.
And it only took me 3 evenings of 1 hour to 2 hours each to read Creatures. And it's, and A Night in the Lonesome October is even shorter. I would love to hear what people think in that way, because I honestly don't know. I think there are elements and parts of it that people would say, like what I just read, right? That would pass. But some of the other weird stuff, but still, even here, he does things that like that I don't think people would I don't know if it would fly. Just the ways that he says certain things, like several times he says, and now comes the prince who was 1,000, and stuff like that. I don't know if that would be considered like fun. I giggle and love it, but I don't know if other people would, or how a general readership would take it. Yeah.
I think, well, you bring up an excellent point, because his writing style is unique, and he does do a lot of things on purpose as well, which would piss off a certain population of readers. But I think he also would probably gain a cult reader following. And because in the start you had mentioned that you had a hard time finding his books, of course, because at that time it was only paper books. But maybe with the advent of ebooks now, maybe he would have found a wider base. Maybe he would have found.
Yeah, you can find almost anything that he's written now. Yeah.
And to your point about William Gibson, I think we have someone following in their footsteps, Michael R. Fletcher. Let me tell you that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's stuff.
There is some stuff that he does that, there's a big, I think, a big Gibson influence there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's like a huge dose of what the fuck, we'll know if it's fantasy or if he's writing science fiction, or the crazy mix that he does. But it's like there's a solid element of that, so.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
so.
And I don't know. I'm pretty sure that I know Mike fairly well, and I'm pretty sure that he's read Gibson. But I don't know if he's read Zelazny, any Zelazny stuff. I'm going to have to bug him.
You should, before the next Wizards.
I will.
You
I
should.
will.
But I would bet actual money that he probably has read William Gibson. Like, there's the way Gibson writes stuff, and the way Michael R. Fletcher writes stuff, there's even, I'm not calling plagiarism or anything, but there's a certain element of nihilism, but at the same time, just crazy stuff, but written originally.
I know he was a big cyberpunk fan and was reading a lot of those books when he was younger. So I'm sure he read Gibson.
If you do ask him, let me know too, because I'm now very curious. He's going to be coming in on this podcast show with one of his selections. I don't remember.
Awesome!
But he has volunteered very kindly, so I'll be bugging him about that. All right, I want to talk to you about I'm going to read out a section because it has that humorous, And this was that section which we were talking about a little bit earlier. That it's kind of torture, but it isn't. And let me just set the scene there. So there's these two.
Sure.
There's a person called Freytag, and there's another person called Boltag. They're both basically specialists who read innards to glean the future. And Freytag has basically told one of Joachim that he has told one of the characters that if you find this person, the questions that you seek, they will not be answered by just simple animals. I need a live human. And then he gives Boltag's name, like, capture this guy, and I can tell you everything. So Boltag is captured, his stomach is eviscerated. And of course, this is all hinted at strongly, but not described in gruesome terms.
Right.
And this is what how it begins, how it kind of starts. Strangely, mutters Boltag, thou hast read that part all right, but thy failing vision was clouded by that bit of mesentery thou hast erroneously mixed into things. With a mighty effort, Boltag rolls nearer gasps, and thou dost not tell, great Horus, that he will meet with mighty peril, and ultimately failure. Silence, cries Fredag. I did not call in thee for a consultation. They are my innards. I will not have them misread by a poser. Like, I read the part and I was chuckling along because it was so weird that this
it's this horrendous nasty, and it turns out that they're brothers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, cousins are, but they're close related.
He's just cut open and pulled the innards out of his brother.
Yes,
and they call themselves ridiculous stuff like poser. And there's a lot of stuff where he throws in like really kind of very modern, contemporary 60s terminology, right? Like poser. Well, there's hilarious stuff where some of the younger characters call some of the older characters dad. Okay, fat dad, whatever you say, right?
And the humor and it hits you in strange places. Like, this was not a scene where I was expecting humor at all.
No.
Came along, I was just chuckling along, and there was just nothing to do. All right. So for people who are very much intrigued, please do read this book to see why this book has enamored Dyrk so much. All right, last question before I know you're going to be very busy, but I want to talk to you about like the certain oddities of this book, like Steel General. There's also the pleasure comps, which the way they're described, they're computers with the lower body of a female, and to give accurate predictions, they need to be satisfied. Literally the description as it is given.
To be fair, there are male versions too.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yes, there are male versions too.
And there are female versions. So it's everybody's land for everybody. But there's also these multiple worlds which they describe of like, and I believe there's 6 houses or 6 worlds that they have to traverse, or at least Joaquin needs to traverse to find the person that they need. And there's also these fugue stick abilities. What fascinated you the most amongst all of this?
I have to say that it's like I loved each weird little piece. And if you read them separately, if I were to read some more things out of context for you, you'd think these things don't even sound like they come from the same book. It's not the same kind of overall feeling. Not all of the kind of horrible, scary stuff has a humorous element, right? And it's like some of it makes you go, oh. And then some of it just makes you laugh out loud. And some of it just makes you go, what the fuck? The shoes, right? The temple of the shoes. It's like these giant tennis shoes that people worship, and they have all these warriors guarding them. It's just like so insane.
It is insane. There's no other way to describe it.
It's insane. But somehow, for me, he's able to take it through all these different genres and styles and types of mood and feel, and have it be from like incredibly light and airy to like incredible, having this incredible weight to it. And somehow in a very short book brings it all together. And then when it ends, it's just like, reading it again, I've read it probably 6 times. I'm just sitting there going, Jesus, it's just, and all of his books are kind of like that. They kind of have an end and they kind of don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because it's a bit anticlimactic. Like it's not the ending that you would expect. And in its own way,
and yet it still feels like closure.
Yes,
in a very strange emotional way. Yeah,
it definitely.
Yeah, so I would say that it's. I mean, the passages like that one about that I read about the. I mean, I will read an entire book and tell everyone I love it if it has just one passage like that, and I didn't really like the rest of it, because this book has several passages like that that just have me in awe of what he was able to do. And a lot of the reason that stuff works like that is where you place it, right? How you pace it along, and he knew just where to do that. Now, there are some of his books that are not quite as on to me as this one, though they're all pretty wonderful. There's not one of his books that I say, I don't really like that. If any of them, I would say probably that I've read my least favorite, even though I still love it, is the Chronicles of Amber, to be honest. Even though I still really, really like it. It just it doesn't speak to me like a lot of his other works. But I think what I like the most is how he's able to pull together all these different styles and all these different genres and all these different approaches, and make them work as a cohesive piece, because he's got parts of it that are written as if it's a play, parts of it that are written in poetry. He tells stories of the past. He hints at things, he drops hints of things that are going to happen in the future in the story, and somehow he knows where to put it. I have no idea how he does it.
He does that. He does that all too often, and he does that, quite regularly with all of his books. So it's definitely something that most writers can aspire to, and of course, with the number of Hugo and Nebula wins, just the number of nominations each, 14 nominations each. That is huge for a writer who has been so prolific, but also at the same time keeping everything short. Even this book, it's I think below 200 pages, 199 if I'm not wrong.
It's really small. It's and Lord of Light is not long. A lot of his books, the Chronicle of Amber books are not that long. You can read all of the Chronicles of Amber, and there's like a ton of them in one volume. And that's the way I've been reading them. But to go back to your the pleasure model, right? It would seem that is out of place. And at first I thought I felt that it was, but it was the perfect, I thought, distraction for Horus, right? Because Horus is hell-bent on destroying Set, right? Joachim, he thinks he's Joachim. He doesn't know he's Set at first. Horus is sent by Osiris. And there's that one joke made later that just because he figured out a way to replace his human head with a bird head, he thinks he's all that, kind of thing. So there's the weird science and fantasy stuff, but I really liked that, even though at first I was like, why is this interesting? Also, this thing gives him information that he needs that helps with the story too, and he ends up falling in love with it, and that totally fucks up everything for him. and then there's that great fairy tale moment there, right? Because basically it's the fairy tale moment where it's Beauty and the Beast, it's Sleeping Beauty, right? Where because he says something alluding to the fact that he loves this creature, the curse, and it's a curse, even though it's a scientific thing, the curse is broken, and she's able to return to her human form. And and it's so bizarre, and it's such a tiny, it makes it sound like this long, us talking about it makes it sound like it's this long subplot part of the story, but it's just really, it's only told in like 3 tiny little snippets of 3 or 4 paragraphs each.
And then it's done. There's no forewarning about this thing. There's no it's just done, and you're like, wait, what? Who was cursed? All of them are cursed. Nothing, just nothing. It's just like a tiny snippet into the weirdness that is Zelazny's writing, and then we go. All right, well, Dyrk, I want to thank you for your time and for talking about this wonderfully.
Thank you for talking to me about, I have nobody to talk about this stuff. This has been a thrill. I was so excited when you contacted me, and I did have to think for a while and I was like, no, Zelazny, I have to talk about Zelazny.
No, but I'm still, I know you're busy, with the house stuff and with your writing as well, but I'm not gonna let you go just yet. I do have a couple of
Okay.
for you, but not related to Zelazny's writing. This is related to your writing because people are wanting to know. I know last year, maybe it was in 2020 or 2021, one of those times you had mentioned in the, in a huge writer's AMA that you're writing on a new series.
Mhm.
It is called, well, at least tentatively it was called, it is being co-written with David Estes,
Mhm.
a popular indie writer as well, and I believe it's tentatively titled Kraken Rider Z, if I'm not wrong.
That's correct. Yep.
All right. Well, can you give us any updates on that?
Yes, it's the writing is going a little slower because of some family health issues and the renovations on the house and some things. It's going a little slower, but we are still planning on having it done third quarter or fourth quarter, beginning of fourth quarter, end of third quarter this year. And the first book. Yep. And it is still tentatively called Kraken Rider Z. And and I'm having more fun writing this than I did writing Paternus. Just because it's even a little goofier, and it's just really fast and fun, and it doesn't have a really it doesn't have all the intense research and keeping all these different threads together. And I described it when I first was talking about it. I described it as, screw it, I'm going to make a magic military dragon rider school progression epic fantasy with an outcast who works his way up to be the best. Only my main character is going to ride a kraken instead of a dragon. So basically that's exactly what it still is. And it's been really fun. I wanted to make it fast and fun, fast, fun read, very kind of tropey, and hopefully other folks will like it, because David and I are having a great time with it.
Well, I have to, I know, I have told you this before. I want to read it so bad because it sounds
you will
fun. It sounds so much fun.
Well, you're going to be an alpha reader, that.
Yes, I do, but still,
as soon as it's in a shape where I can send it to an alpha reader, and it'll still be pretty rough, you'll get it.
That's so fine, but I still want, because like you mentioned it, it's set in a nautical world, it's epic fantasy, but set in a nautical world. There's dragon riders, there's a school setting, which of course, most fantasy know. But then the trick is, it's not a dragon, it's a, and I see the title, because that title is the best part. The title is like, you tell anybody, there's a book called Kraken Rider Z. How in the world are they not going to pick that up? Like, that is, like, anybody who doesn't pick that up, they can't call themselves a fantasy fan. Like, I don't know. Like it, and I hope, and maybe this is just me talking out to in the future, but I hope you come up with Kraken plushies, so plushy toys, because
I would love that. Yeah, little Kraken plushy toys, and for now, I've named the Kraken Jessup.
Jessup. Oh,
he doesn't have a big tough name because he's named by a 7-year-old boy.
Yes.
Right? And he named his pigs Midge and Boris, right? He's a kid, so he named this thing Jessup, and there are some jokes made about that. But honestly, my very first idea was Kraken. If there's one thing that dragons fear, it's a kraken. Luckily for the riders and the dragons, no one's seen or heard of a kraken for 1,000 years until now, right? So
yep. I love the tagline. I'm just going to read out the potential blurb because you have it on your site. So
okay, cool.
All right, so here's how it goes. If there's one thing dragons fear, it's a kraken. Even lowly hull scrubber Z Taro knows that. Like everyone on the island kingdom of Tosh, he was frightened by the fables of great krakens as a child. It seems an odd thing to press upon the children of the realm, because, luckily for the dragons and the riders, no one has seen a kraken in 1,000 years. Then again, Tosh is a society that lives off the sea, that exists only at the will of the ocean. Royal Dragon Knights guard the king's ships and vessels, defending them from the constant threat of pirates, hostile empires, and beasts of the sea. It makes sense that the people would fear krakens, even after generations of knights graduate and take flight from the ramparts of Triumph Citadel, an elite academy exclusive to the rich and well-connected. Well, at school, a school whose Z barely has ever had more than 2 copper pennies rubbed together has no chance of getting into. Or does he? Z has a secret, a decades-old secret, unknown to anyone but himself. He not only has seen a kraken, he saved its life. When the truth gets out, will Z be hunted by the Dragon Knights he always has envied and admired? Or will he be given a chance to become the first kraken rider in history? And the kraken name is Jessup. Okay, I don't know about anybody who, after listening to you and after hearing this, this quick blurb, is interested. I mean, they just probably they don't have a heart and soul. I don't know what else.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been so much fun to do,
and it is such a vast departure from your patroness books. Like, I always like, when authors try to stretch their mental muscles and try to write in different genres, and I get it, it's not like, it's not easy as a writer as well, because you have a big demands that we want this, how dare you give something else. But I love the fact that you went from epic urban fantasy, which was its own unique box, and I maintain that you are the Tolkien of the 21st century, or second century.
I am incredibly honored.
But to go from that to this nautical progressive military academy fantasy involving a kraken, how did it happen? Just maybe we'll have to talk about this more later when you.
It was a joke, honestly. When I said all that stuff, and I was going to throw in all the kitchen sink stuff, it was literally a joke in a writer's group. And then I got contacted. We really kind of like that idea. We'd love to have you write it. And I'm like, oh, I don't think so. And then David Essex got involved, and I love David. He's so cool. So yeah, I got the deal with Wraithmarked Creative, and we're doing it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I cannot wait to read it, not only as alpha reader, but just as a general reader as well. And I'm pretty sure people who are, who have loved the Patronus trilogy, people who have not read your books, they will want to read this. I can just tell you, just from what you have described and from the way the blurb works, and that Zanny title, like, maybe there is a bit of Zelazny's, inspiration for you as well.
Yeah.
So again, Dyrk, thank you so very much for doing this and for you taking the time. I would love to have you on maybe in another future episode for the Lonesome October, because I'm definitely reading.
I would love to do that. Yeah,
we'll definitely talk more. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Dyrk. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.